Hey y'all, and welcome back to another video of My Creative Life with Kelssweetie, where we read books and we make art. Today we are going over my August wrap-up. August was Arts Appreciation Month, and so I read nothing but memoirs essentially all month, and it was a time. I will say, I don't think that I'm going to become a memoir girl. I do think I could see myself every August for Arts Appreciation Month reading memoirs because it was eye-opening and I really did love all of the books that I read this last month. But I do feel like it was a lot. It was very much a lot of information, and I'm remembering now, like, I used to be that girl who read a lot of memoirs wanting to feel like the smartest person in the room. And I felt it coming back because there's so much information you're getting from these things. Um, but at the same time, it felt like I was Dorothy pulling back the curtain, and instead of seeing the great, powerful Oz, you just see Richard Pryor sitting behind the curtain, just a normal man who's scared. That's that's exactly what I felt like reading these novels, reading these memoirs this last month. So it was a lot, but I did honestly enjoy learning so much because from learning about these people's lives, I did learn more about history and facts and culture. And it was an eye opener in a lot of different ways of how I think of these icons in my life. So let's get into it. There is quite a bit to kind of talk about, but I didn't finish my book club book. So we're going to have a conversation about that after this. Hey y'all, so I just wanted to start off with my graphic novel that I read this month. It was a manga, and I could see myself definitely wanting to get further into this series, and that was Zom 100 by Haro Aso and Kotaro Takada. The art in here is amazing. It was enjoyable. I had a great time. I want to watch the show now. I definitely want to watch the show now. It was a lot of fun reading this, and I feel like it was hilarious. I feel like it had a lot of commentary in regards to working a 9 to 5 that you feel like you're the walking dead at. You don't know, time is just like, I'm not even waking up. I'm not even going back home to sleep. It's just work, work, work. And it was hilarious and like satirical, but at the same time, it wasn't. Like, I felt it. And to kind of see this guy kind of be like, it's my day off forever, and having that excitement and being like, okay, well, now I can do everything I want to do. Let's try and do everything I can do before I turn into a zombie inevitably, is a lot of fun, and I appreciate it. I thought it was hilarious. So I definitely could see myself like reading more of this series. I want to watch the show now because I know that Netflix made a show or movie. I will say it is a little pricey at $14.99 for this that I knocked out in just an hour, but I will say it was very nice to read something physically and know for a fact, just give me an hour and I'll be done with this. In a very satisfying way, instead of being like, oh, like, I only, like, this only took an hour type of situation. I appreciated that, and I think that it was very interesting, and I liked it, very much liked it. Could see myself reading the second volume. I'm not certain how many volumes there are in this like series, but I'm excited to see what's next for for them in this bucket list of the dead. It was very funny. But I don't know if I'll be like, oh, I'm gonna read manga now nonstop. But this might be a gateway. Like, I might kind of like have one off to the side at all times just to kind of knock out here and there to kind of build my confidence again. Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. I really picked this up because I'd seen so many people reading it and I had seen so many people recommend it, and I just was tired of being out of the loop on this, and I figured, well, I'd gotten it. Maybe I'll finally be able to read it. I'd heard people cry when they read this, and it wasn't what I was expecting, as well as the fact that I did not realize Michelle Zauner, which I'm kind of like looking at in the like the breakdown of the memoir, it doesn't say that Michelle Zauner was like the lead singer of Japanese Breakfast, which I listen to Japanese Breakfast, but I've never known who actually is the singer. and the front person of the band. So I'm like, oh, okay, well, that was a fun little thing to learn. Um, this book was nothing like what I was expecting. I wasn't really expecting anything much, but it wasn't at all what I was feeling like I was getting myself into. This went into a huge conversation in regards to cancer and having a family member who is going through cancer, having their mother go through cancer. And she breaks down the experience of watching her mother deal with this very, very like in depth. Personally, as I've talked about in some of my weekly logs over on Patreon, it was hard for me to move through this book, mainly because I personally have family members right now who had just gotten cancer diagnoses, who are going through treatment. And so to hear the really dark side of that treatment was really difficult. And I did have to take some breaks in between reading this, and it slowed me down at the beginning of this last month. Um, on a high note of it, though, it was interesting to hear kind of go down this memory lane of MySpace and what type of music was coming out at this time when Michelle Zauner was trying to really get up out there. Um, and she wasn't not yet Japanese Breakfast, but she was trying to be like one of those alt girls, like the Yeah Yeah Yeahs. And it was interesting to kind of hear that and where she kind of broke through and these issues of identity crises a little bit. It was extremely interesting to hear how she dealt with her mother's sickness that overcame her, especially considering where the relationship was at before she got sick. That was extremely interesting. There were just so many parts of this book that I don't think that I was expecting to get out of it, and it was kind of broken up in a lot of different portions, which I will say, like, reading wise, it did sometimes feel a little disconjoined because you were wondering, is this a conversation in regards to Michelle, or is this more so a conversation in regards to her in relation to her mother? And then at the end of the book, you get a lot of conversation regarding what happened after her mother passes and her relationship to her father, which is very, very hard. So you're wondering at the entire time, what is the focus of this? Is it her, just Michelle, and the many different levels and parts of her? The many different like feelings of who she is in connection to her father or her mother or just herself? Or is this more of a breakdown in regards to her mother and that kind of livelihood? In which case, the ending kind of got a little bit confusing for me on what she was trying to achieve. And I think that was my main thing that walking away from it, my only thing that I was a little bit confused about. I think that it was an amazing telling of what to kind of expect during those times. I don't know. It's hard to explain what this book was. I do feel like, and please note, like throughout all of this, that these conversations are all in regards to a memoir, and my rating or conversation in regards to my experience with these really are rated on impact of my experience, not necessarily their lives. I always feel like it should go without saying, but I will say it, when rating and reviewing these novels, these not these novels, these memoirs. This is a conversation in regards to what was my experience reading back these words, the impact of me reading this, not the impact of their lives. Because of course, how can you do that? I think it's always weird reviewing memoirs and everything. And I always feel like that always needs to be explained. In saying I enjoyed in this book, I think is completely off base because it's not something you enjoy, especially in the middle portions when we get very visceral conversations and discussions about her mother and her cancer experience and her failing health and just really these moments of trying to still have hope through it all, but at every turn kind of getting that thwarted. I think that I sometimes got a little lost in the sauce in what Michelle was trying to work through. And I think I mentioned this in my Sweet Nothings log over on my Patreon, that I think that this was Michelle's way of just talking about a lot of what she had gone through and airing it out, because it seems to me that she hadn't, because of how it didn't feel like it was focused or step by step or a through line. It felt like this book was her actually finally getting all of that out when she hadn't. And so it had a sense to feel a little confusing because it really wasn't, it's not necessarily like it was just her rattling thoughts, but in a way, it was her just expressing what needed to be expressed through this kind of loose timeline, in my opinion. And that's what I kind of got near the end of this. But I get why everybody recommends it. Again, like I said, I had to take many breaks. One, as somebody whose mother has been chronically ill her entire life, some of the conversations that were coming up in here are something that I've had to basically think of in regards to my mother's mortality my entire life. Never mind these conversations of cancer and dealing with that with my own family members. I think that this is a very hard book if you're dealing with any of those things, and that's why I had to take many breaks. So I will just say that I don't think I've ever heard anybody really talk about that in regards to the reviews I've heard of this. I don't know why. It's a huge part of this book. So I'm not certain. And even in the breakdown of, I don't know. I guess it does say the excruciating months with the battle of her mother with cancer, but a lot of it focused on that. So I don't know why it wasn't a huge focus in the synopsis. It was hard starting off this month with a book like this. From there, I then read something that I felt like would maybe feel a little more upbeat after reading Zom 100, and that was the Chronicles of Doom, Unraveling Rap's Mask Iconoclast. Again, I think one thing that's going to be an ongoing thing is that I can't use the verb enjoyed. I did like love these memoirs and what they gave me, what insight they had to give, but enjoyed is not the correct word in describing and reviewing these because it was rough. It was rough to hear about Doom in such a very raw state. I think they did not hold back. And after doing some reviewing, Doom's estate did not approve the release of this. Like, it's not backed by the estate. I can see why it's not, because it talks very heavily about Doom's downfalls and vices as far as women and cheating and alcoholism and drug dealing and his depression. All of that are concerned. I think, and I mentioned this in the beginning, to see someone who during the 2000s, during the Adult Swim era, me as a millennial, that's the Doom I knew. You know, Doom is godfather of backpack rap type of thing in this very like pseudo intellectual type of atmosphere. You know, you have to keep in mind that I was like 12 when Doom was probably at his like height. I don't even know if it was 12, you know, maybe 11 or something when I was listening to Doom. So of course, that's the lens that I've always looked at Doom as, you know? And reading this, you realize how depressed he was, how dark he was. I think, you know, hiding behind these things of like, oh, he's into comic books and stuff, so he's got to be a nerdy guy. No, Doom was in the streets. He was selling drugs. He was drinking himself silly 24/7. I mean, he was a functioning alcoholic. He was constantly drinking to the point where I was concerned because for a very long time they didn't say like how Doom passed, and even when everyone found out, it was like months after the fact that he had passed from liver failure because that's how much he was drinking. It was horrible to hear about that. And but what was amazing and what I really loved is that the first half or first, I want to say third of this book, really a good portion of it though, is showing how Doom didn't just show up during the early 2000s. That he had been around since the 80s and very much so a part of the Leaders of the New School crew, that he was a part of the early moments of Def Jam and was a part of everything with Russell Simmons and was being signed to and had a whole group, and that group then was dropped from their label after their second project but had a completely different sound and vibe in some ways to, of course, where Doom ended up. But in a lot of ways, you can see the beginnings of how he was producing music and how he got there, which was really interesting to read about. And was also a huge hip hop history lesson, in my opinion, which I like that it was really shown that way because it shows how much Doom paid a lot of dues that I don't think that he ever felt that he really got his roses on. And even in the 2000s when he finally started to get some of that height, I think there was a part of him that still felt like he still hadn't gotten his just due. and was constantly feeling like he was backtracking for that. When his brother passed, that is really when we got Doom. Before that, who he was, Zev Love X, which is what his first like rapper name was when he was a part of his crew, um, was a completely different person than the Doom that we all knew of him to be by then, which is just like this dark guy hiding behind a mask, the drinking problem, all of that. After his brother passed, he went into a depression that I don't think that he ever got out of. And it was hard to hear about that because it just felt like a lot of self deprecation in some ways. It was also hard to hear about some people like refer back to Doom and say that he used people, but you felt great while he was doing it. It was a weird thing. He was absolutely about his money and all of that, but he wasn't like trying to say he was a moral dude. And he wasn't. He wasn't at all. It was difficult to kind of hear some of those portions because you did feel like it kind of sucked as a person, which, that's just the name of the game. Sometimes, I mean, we're talking about a male rapper during the early 2000s. Like, these conversations of moral and morality and all of that of a certain generation just are out the door anyways. But I think that for me, having my introduction to Doom be very much pseudo intellectual, like, oh, you're into Doom, like you must be like smart because like Doom would rhyme like this very like there was nothing else like it. There was just it felt like intellectual rap. But to hear how he actually was and what his backstory was, I feel like that was the furthest from really who he was as a personality. So it was extremely interesting to read this. I really loved reading this. I would recommend this to a lot of hip hop heads because, especially in the beginning, and I even feel like in the height of his career during those Adult Swim years, it feels like a timeline of hip hop rather than just a timeline of Doom, which I felt was very much like trying to prove and show the fact that Doom was intertwined always in the hip hop space, and that by the time he kind of got into this place with like the Doom bots and having like which were like these fake dooms that he would put out on performances or whatever, or like the big ego portions or any of those things that kind of started to follow him near later in his career, you kind of start to realize like it's because some of it is just him being absolutely jaded from where he had been prior. So I enjoyed it entirely. I'm glad I did because, as y'all know, this is one of my favorite covers I've found this year. I'm still extremely, extremely like in love with this cover. Honestly, still like one of my favorites, and it's just it's still gorgeous to me. I like still look at it again. I've always said it, but like if I could have it facing out on my shelves, I would. But I do think that it was hard to kind of read that again. That conversation of the great powerful Oz and looking behind the curtain and seeing a very kind of depressive dude. I also really it was interesting to hear how he had issues with his immigration status at the end of the book and wasn't in the US when he passed because of a lot of different things. And I feel like that was very on point to a lot of things that we're experiencing right now in the US. And it was interesting to hear that Doom was having issues in that space. Highly recommend it. If you are into hip hop whatsoever, I can't recommend this one enough to you. I then switched gears and read Memoirs and Misinformation by Jim Carrey and Dana Vashon. I had put this off because I'd done a mistake, something that I always try not to do, and I read a good amount of reviews. Like I'll watch some things on BookTube. Of course, I'm on Bookstagram, but it's different when you go on a place like Goodreads or Fable and read reviews, in my opinion. And I try to stay away from them because people get real cocky with the keyboard. And I also like to go into things just loosely knowing what I'm getting into, like bare level things. And I read too much. And I think that a lot of people were saying like they didn't get it, that it felt all over the place and all of that. And I agree. I do feel like it is a fever dream of a book, but I do think that people didn't get what Jim Carrey was trying to do here, or you weren't the right audience for it. Let me explain. So, this is a pseudo memoir in a way, while also still being an emotional memoir. I like to say that this is a pseudo factual memoir, but an emotional memoir, an actual, like, this is actually Jim Carrey's thoughts and feelings in regards to Hollywood, his experiences in Hollywood, and everything, but at a very metaphorical level rather than a very literal level. because as you read through this, and I can't explain to you what happens in this book, what happens in this piece of weird fiction that isn't fiction type of thing, because a fever dream, it's Jim Carrey. It's very much Jim Carrey. It feels hilarious and funny, but only in a way, and I said this in my review, it is Jim Carrey in the sense of Jim Carrey already has made 4 jokes and we're still catching up on the first. And I feel like that's an explanation of Jim Carrey's entire life, Jim Carrey's career. He's in on the joke and no one else is. But those who are, and they get it. That is what this is. Because it's not Jim Carrey. None of this could be real. Aliens show up on Earth. Nick Cage is fighting aliens and Kelsey Grammer is a part of a cult and Gwyneth Paltrow is like secretly a serial killer. Like these things are just crazy. But at the same time, some of the metaphors for what these things are really to show what how absurd Hollywood is. Because there's a lot of things in here that are absurd, but at the same time, you're like, nah, that could definitely happen. Especially living in a place like LA, having been in 2 industries now, media industries now. There's things in here that I just kind of go, that's absurd. But at the same time, totally could happen. Like Kanye shows up when the aliens are there and it's Kanye and Kim. You know, this was written in like I think 2018. This when it was released. So I think they were still together or something like that. I don't know. They have who I guess would have been maybe North or something at that time. And he's just like, "Oh, the alien said that we're the sun mother, the star mother and the star father. This is our star child." And everything he said like one of the journalists like they sit there and they question him. He goes, aliens shoot them down or whatever. They don't listen, of course. And he ends up crying about the fact that he feels like nobody's paying attention or listening to him. This was during the time that like Life of Pablo was out and he was having like this was before like he had really been checked in for his mental health and stuff like that. So of course it feels like that's ridiculous. But at the same time you're like, I feel like Kanye would do that. Like type of thing. That is what this book is this constant situation of going, that sounds ridiculous. But at the same time, totally could have happened. And it's a fever dream. It somehow talks about AI and selling your likeness and why these actors are selling their likenesses. It's talking about struggle. It's talking about belonging. But then it also has this dry humor where you only get the punchline if you know who they're talking about. And that's where I kind of come to why I kind of saw a lot of reviews who didn't get this book. If you are not into a lot of pop culture, if you're not into movies, especially of a certain era, like early 2000s, late 90s type of era, and you know actors' names and all of that, this book you will not understand. It will not be funny to you. You won't get it. You won't get the punchlines and everything because it's important for. At no point does Dana Fashawn and Jim Carrey go, "This is Gwyneth Paltrow, actress of and spokesperson of. This is Kelsey Grammer. You may know him from the producer of this, that, and the third." They don't do that. They talk about these people as if you already know who these people are. So when Nick Cage is sitting there and doing some sort of mixed martial arts with Jim Carrey in his dojo at sunset, you're supposed to find that hilarious because Nick Cage is it's crazy, is insane, is a Coppola who also like tried to make it on his own and changed his last name and does all these insane characters all the time and everything. But if you don't know who Nick Cage is and you don't know some of his background, that's not going to hit the same way. That punchline isn't going to hit. Kelsey Grammer sitting here and interrupting people at a cult conference or whatever, constantly trying to like encroach on their experiences and stuff isn't going to be hilarious if you don't know like, well, that's the same guy who played Frasier. That's the producer of Girlfriends. That's Beast in X-Men. Like these are my references of him, you know? So I will say that I recommend this book. I recommend this memoir. I feel like every time I say book, like somebody may be going like, oh, like it's fiction. I'm just saying that it's a book. That's why I keep on double backing. But I recommend this memoir to those who are very much into pop culture and movies. If you are not, I don't recommend it to you because the entire thing, you will be lost. You won't get the punchlines. You won't understand the metaphors. You won't think that any of this is funny. I had plenty of laugh out loud portions of this where I had to stop it because I was laughing so hard. But when I went to go tell my partner about it, he didn't laugh because he didn't know the context. Again, I think that this was really great. I think it was inventive, but it was made for a certain audience. And if you aren't that audience, this doesn't make sense to you. That is my one thing. But I highly enjoyed it. I will say this is the one that I was like, oh, this was enjoyable. The next book that I got into was Dilla Time. I have had this on my shelf for now 2, maybe 3 years. When I first really got back into reading, I picked this up because I really wanted to read about Jay Dilla, and I couldn't get through it. I couldn't get through it. And I think that one, it's thick. She's thick, and she is long. There are a lot of visual things to see in here, which are amazing. More so near the front, you have a lot of those visual aids. Nearing the end, you don't really have those visual aids as much because you get more in the weeds about where his career was going, where his health was going. This was amazing. Again, though, I will say that it was hard to read certain portions because it's just pulling back that curtain again and realizing Dilla had so many vices in his life. I mean, he was hiding an entire family from like the main woman in his life and his child, which was just very interesting. I mean, you can tell that Dan Charnas did not hold. It was very factual. You could tell that he was a writer, like a very article factual based writer, as opposed to SS Fernando. What is it? SH Fernando Jr., who felt more like he's a article for like Rolling Stone and stuff like that. So more like thought pieces, opinion pieces. You could feel that in that aside from this, which felt more historical, factual, research based. Um, and somehow he stayed unbiased while talking about very much all of Dilla's life, like all of it. I really don't know how he got all of this research in this. It was truly a feat. One thing that I loved was hearing Dilla's background and how he grew up and the family he came from. You know, it wasn't just Dilla and his family that was creative and thought the ways that he did and all of that. He really kind of came, and there were many like comparisons to the Jackson 5, like just simply like coming from a very musically, creatively inclined family. And it was amazing to hear how Dilla grew up. Now, I will say, hearing about Dilla's upbringing, how he was as a child, how he was in his personal life, even, and how he was in the studio, I think that personally, Dylan may have been on the spectrum. And I feel that because of some of the ticks that he had, being very much, I like what I like, don't move my stuff, I have things in a certain place, and even the way that he thought about beats. He thought about them mathematically and logically, as opposed to creatively, which you would think that, considering what he was making, that must have been where he was coming from, but it wasn't chaos. It was very structured. He was taking beats out to mathematically and logically go, but they go back here. And that time signature being completely off from anybody else's and basically inventing. I mean, reading this made me realize Jay Dilla has basically been the precipice and the godfather of a majority of my musical like preference. He essentially made a lot of neo soul. He made the sound of like neo soul, Soulquarian rap, like that is Jay Dilla. All of that is Dilla. With it wouldn't have sounded the same. The 2000s rap wouldn't have sounded the way that it sounded whatsoever had it not been for Dilla. The late 90s rap would have not sounded like it sounded if it wasn't not for Dilla. Erica Badu's sound, Common, all of them. Hearing about how much Common was actually a huge friend of Dilla's and Dilla stayed with him when he became sick was crazy to kind of hear about. Hearing about how Q-Tip was the precipice of Dilla getting kind of his big start and being a part of all of that was insane to hear about. Again, I would recommend this to anybody who is a hip hop fan because even after they go into, which of course it says the afterlife of Jay Dilla in the subtitle, but they go into his reach with LA hip hop and Kendrick Lamar and Terrace Martin and even Hiatus Coyote, who I mean I have them tattooed on me. Like it's crazy to hear where his influence led, and that was amazing to hear. It was hard to hear the parts where it was a little more unsavory as far as him as a person who had a big anger issues, had a temper, had social issues, in my opinion, had some social anxiety, in my opinion, which again goes back to why I kind of said what I said about feeling like Dilla might have been just undiagnosed in regards to being on some sort of spectrum, and where his creativity like was kind of coming from, where his brain was and everything. He was a huge mama's boy, unfortunately, so to be completely honest with you, because it did not help in his later parts of life. The sad part for me, though, was the fact that I feel like Dilla and his family fell victim to the system, and the system that Black people have been subject to, which is a lack of education in regards to finances and health. Dilla, honestly, if he would have gone to the doctor as soon as he was feeling bad, they could have maybe helped him, possibly. He did not, though. He refused to go. Now, at the same time, they, even once he passed, they still hadn't really locked down what he had other than a rare blood disease. And there's still speculation on what that disease was, because more research has been done now, and they realize that it may have been something else all entirely than what they had originally said it was, which is hard to hear because at one point they said it was one thing, then they said it was lupus, which is why they have the walkers, which is for lupus, and now they're saying it's something else entirely. It's difficult to kind of hear about that, but it's also difficult to hear that when Dilla was diagnosed, he also didn't take care of himself. He wasn't eating right. He wasn't eating healthy. He wasn't taking the advice that any of the doctors were giving him, and he would cut his treatment short. He didn't want to be at his treatments. He wasn't taking them seriously. He wrote a will, but didn't really write a will, kind of just gave it all to his mother and his brother to figure out, which unfortunately, because he owed so much in back taxes, which that was wild to hear about, his estate was seized essentially by, these financial accountants that were suing everybody for using his likeness and using his music without their okay and consent, while his mother was sitting here doing crazy stuff, selling stuff, not giving it to the estate, which the estate was supposed to be split amongst her, her brother, and his two children. And they kept on telling her, you not giving money to the state means that we can't pay off this bill, which means that's more time that not only you don't get money, your kids aren't getting any money. Your grandchildren are. You're literally taking money from your grandchildren. And from her actions, it made it seem like she didn't care, which was hard to hear about because she was like, well, I need to be taken care of. She was Dilla's manager basically his entire life. And I feel like there was a part of her that felt like she was owed to be taken care of. And that wasn't going to happen the way things were set up and the way that things were left. It was very hard to hear about that. And it's a reminder that, like, Dilla was 27, 28 years old when he passed. I'm 30. So I am now older than Dilla was when he passed, which is hard because as it's like hearing Pac was 26. 20, what is he, 26 or 24 or something like that? I can't remember. Or and Biggie, they were like that age. I'm way past how they were. That's insane considering, I grew up going like those are, heroes, those are the height, those are icons of music, and they're older. I'm now older than those icons. I'm older than Jimi Hendrix. I'm sitting here and I'm like, how could you have done all that you did before you'd even hit 30? And it's amazing to hear the impact he had with everybody in his life, but at the same time it's also sad to hear that things could have been different had he just gone about it differently, had there just been a lot more concern and education around some of these things. And that was probably the most upsetting thing to hear about, as well as, Dylan loved the strip club and he loved the girls. That's all I'm gonna say about that. Again, a lot of these people had their vices. But I'm so glad that I finished this. It was amazing kind of moving through all of this, and again hearing all this history about culture, and the connections. Like, it just felt like 6 degrees of separation with everybody in Dilla's life and who he knew and being a part of Detroit and all of that. So again, I would recommend this just like I did with the Doom memoir to anybody who is a hip hop head entirely. Absolutely got so much out of this. I then read, it was very, very short because it's kind of not a complete memoir, and that was Prince's The Beautiful Ones. This was the beginning of a memoir that Prince was supposed to be working on right before he passed. He had started working on it, and then unfortunately, according to the editor's note that takes up pretty much a good chunk of this, where he's explaining how they got here and what this document is. He started on it, and they were getting ready to get writing. He had already written some pages of stuff that he wanted included, and then he ended up passing, unfortunately. And so they still released this with the pages, along with pictures and effects and everything, that they could find at his estate. I think that it was great to kind of read, to put a little bit, just slightly, a little bit of context behind Prince, like this enigma. But unfortunately, it's sad to kind of realize and even just get this little bit to learn a bit more about Prince and where he came from growing up, and realize that you're never going to get the full story because he passed before he could give us all everything. But it was amazing to kind of hear about even parts of his upbringing, and a lot of even like where Purple Rain was originally supposed to go, because there were some notes in regards to that, and how it ended up like something completely different, which you're just kind of like, well, that's crazy, because apparently Purple Rain was supposed to be more of a mental health conversation because the kid was supposed to be schizophrenic. And I think there's still evidence of that in what Purple Rain ended up as, but it's not like an absolute, like, oh, that's what we're talking about, at all. And even kind of seeing like how did he write certain things, just seeing his writing, seeing him as like a child and growing up, that was also just like crazy. And then there were of course like all these portions of like pictures and notes that they found, and everything at his estate. So it was fantastic. And again, like a lot of this is just transcribed from his actual notes that he had sent for these pages. So that was great that they included that, because they wanted people to know like that they weren't, they weren't fabricating any of this. Again, it's very short, the portions that are actually written by Prince, but I do feel like it's still amazing even to read that portion, even that little bit of it, because it feels like just a lot of insight into more so his parents. I think there was a good portion that we got in regards to his mother, his feelings towards his mother, and his father, which has always kind of been a little loose, especially because I think a lot of people have always looked at Purple Rain like, well, this is based on Prince's life, period. And it's like, it's not really, not entirely, not completely. And honestly, the way that he describes his mother and father are very different in a lot of ways from how they are in the movie, in my opinion. So yeah, absolutely loved it. I thrifted this, and I can see why a lot of people like pick it up, because it has a lot of great stuff in it, about Prince and him and his own words in a lot of portions. But it's just kind of like sad that we'll never get the full story. So I did finally read this though, and yeah, I loved it. I really liked it. I have like an autobiography, and I think at some point I really want to get to that. I've had it for years at this point, but I really want to get it. And it's probably the closest thing I know of that's an actual full autobiography of his career. So that at some point will get read. And finally, the last book that I read this month was A Song for You by Robin Crawford, My Life with Whitney Houston. This was written by Robin Crawford, who was Whitney Houston's best friend, and honestly, probably her biggest love, to be honest. It was heartbreaking to read this, but in a different way than I thought it would be. I think that I was expecting for it to be heartbreaking in the sense of like Whitney and her depression, and what really took her over the edge on her life, and how she got to where she was near the end of her life. And it was more heartbreaking to hear how much self-hatred Whitney had for herself. There was ongoing rumors throughout her entire career about her and Robin being lovers. It's confirmed in here that they were at one point, but that was very early in her career. They cut that off. But it's very clear from Robin's recollection of what happened between them that Whitney was possessive over her, that Whitney really did love Robin. And it's hard to kind of realize that her life could have been extremely different had she not had so much self-hatred in regards to her and her queerness. Whitney grew up in the church very heavily, and the whole reason why her and Robin really stopped with each other was because, it was the start of her career, it was the 80s. So, she was just like, I don't want that to be the first thing. It was the late 70s, early 80s. And it was kind of this agreement too, where Whitney told her, I don't want to go to hell. And she believed that. And Robin at the time, she still was working through her ideas of who she was, both of them being bisexual. And she was like, "Well, I don't want to go to hell either." But she mentioned in here that there was a part of her that didn't feel like that felt right to say, but also she hadn't learned anything differently. So I think it was very interesting because when you hear about Whitney and her relationship with Jermaine Jackson, who was married and dating her, so that wasn't great, and Eddie Murphy, who was in love with her, and she absolutely was in love with him. But it was at like the height of his Raw career, so he wasn't ready to settle down with her and everything, and treated her like she was some side chick, while also being like, "But I do love you, but I don't want to settle down with you." I mean, he even gave her what essentially could have been an engagement ring, all things considered. It cost more than a real wedding ring that Bobby gave her. And he even called her on her wedding day when she was getting married to Bobby and was like, "Don't do that." And she was like, "Are you serious?" Which is interesting because you're like, if she would have ended up with Eddie, who knows where her life would have gone, because around the time that Eddie was spurning her, she had met Bobby. She had started dating Bobby, and where, of course, how Bobby treated her. It was hard to hear all of that when you see Robin being in her corner and loving her till the wheels fell off, you know, to a point where you start seeing Whitney and you see how toxic she is to Robin. And then when Robin finally quits and tries to have like a life all of her own, you almost are rooting for her because it's just like, I'm glad that you took yourself out of that situation because Whitney was not good for you. It was the Whitney show 24/7, and she never seemed to really care about her. Like Robin had mentioned, if it was another guy that was hitting on her, she didn't care. But if she got involved with another woman, she was upset. And it was hard to hear that because it's just the fact that like Whitney truly could have had something different had she not been so concerned in regards to how it looked or how her belief system felt that she should be. Because it was clear that both of them really did love each other, and that, in all honesty, Robin may have been, as far as this recollection is concerned, may have been possibly the love of her life. And if things were just different, it just would have worked out completely different and maybe would have just been a happier ending for her. So it was hard to hear those things, and I think that was the biggest takeaway from a lot of this. While again, of course, getting a lot of historical type of feedback of music during that time, but also I think a big misconception is that Bobby Brown is the one who got Whitney on drugs. Whitney had been doing drugs since she was 14 years old, and that is clearly sitting here from the beginning. Her and Robin used to do drugs until Robin was like, drugs aren't going where we're going, which is success. So she just got off of it. Whitney couldn't get off of it. And that was because of a lot of self hatred that she had in herself and having a very toxic household. Her mother was horrible. I mean, her family, period. Her brother was on drugs. It was just not a good space for her. So I think that that's a big misconception that Bobby got her on drugs. And then, in all honesty, Whitney had always been on drugs, so it was hard to kind of, again, hearing and seeing behind that curtain and seeing, wow, there's a lot of pain there. But I think one thing that, throughout all of the memoirs that I read this month, or at least a good majority, I don't think that trauma is necessary to make amazing genius art. But I mentioned this in one of my logs for this last month. I think focus is. And if your getaway is your art from all the other crap happening around you, or, this piece inside of you, then you will focus on that art all entirely, all encompassing. There is nothing better. There is nothing else I'm caring about. And that focus is what creates geniuses and creativity. The trauma isn't a necessity, it's a vehicle. And I think one thing, unfortunately, that was true throughout all of these books, all of these memoirs, is that this trauma seemed to really run rampant in each one of them. But they were just geniuses. They did not, I mean, it was just, this is where I'm at peace. And I think, you see in the art world, a lot of people sometimes make up their trauma or something along those lines in order to feel like they're real artists that will make the art better. And the thing is that if you need it, you don't need trauma to be an amazing artist. You need focus. Some people have trauma that forces that focus. And that is one thing that I definitely took from a lot of the memoirs that I read this month, because it was hard to see like these geniuses and icons that you look up to, and you're like, oh, I want to know about their creative background and where are they coming from to do this, that, and the other. And it's not even like, "Oh, I had a process." This is drama. So, I did enjoy all of, again, that word enjoy, but I did really, I'm happy that I read all of these this month. I can see myself, every August doing something like this. I cannot just read memoirs because, and a part of me is just like, I need something that's like, it's just metaphor. Like, people aren't actually getting hurt, but I can just like be metaphorical on like the depth of this. Because reading about it is just difficult to realize, these are real people. They live their lives, and almost everybody that I read about it, aside from Michelle Zauner and Jim Carrey, like they've passed. And it's hard to hear what their life was before they did pass. Sometimes on these, y'all pick up your memoirs, but walk lightly on it. I'm gonna need some time before I pick up another memoir because they were just hard. It was great, but it was hard to work there, and it was just so much information all month, which was amazing, but it was a lot to digest. I was highlighting quite a bit throughout all of these. That is my wrap up for August. It was it was a long month in a lot of different ways, but I did enjoy it. Now, you may be sitting there and going, Kelsey, there are some arcs you said that you were going to read, and what about your book club book? I didn't read them. I think that I'm coming to terms with a lot of different stuff. One, I am just far too busy, or my mind is it. I have felt like there's so much going on these last couple of weeks, mentally, life, work wise, all of that. Like I just feel like I'm constantly trying to get ahead of the ball. And there was just no point where I was like, okay, stop. Let's knock out a physical read. There was no moment like that, except for like, Zone 100 was a graphic novel and it was just an hour of my time. I did get through a couple more chapters of Black Punk now. I'm hoping that I just finish that by the end of the year at this point. I'm fine with just chipping away at it. And maybe over the holidays, there'll be more downtime for me to do that. But now, no, I could not finish that. I did not start the arcs, which is another thing that I think that I'm kind of trying to come to terms with, is that I just may not be an arc reader, which I hate that because I feel like, I don't know, I don't want to waste anybody's time. It's why I tell indie authors that I don't take requests to read arcs or review their work, because I feel worse about somebody who's an indie or self-published sitting there using their own money to send me something, and I can't get them what they need in the amount of time because I just don't have time to sit down and read a book physically. So I'm usually just knocking down a lot of audiobooks. And now when it's the one of the big five, I'm like, y'all got the money behind this. And as far as like me being a creator, I'm a drop in the bucket in the grand scheme of some of these people that you're sending arcs to. So I'm not as pressed about it, but I think that there's still a situation where I'm just sitting there and I'm like, I would love if arcs were released on audio. I could do that. But I also know it's a lot of money to create an audiobook, So I get it. But at the same time, I'm just like, if you guys start releasing audiobook arcs, you've got me. Physical, I need to be honest with myself that I can't read them. And so that goes into the fact that this last month, my book club, the Sweethearts Book Club, was supposed to be reading White is for Witching by Helen Oyemi. And it was a physical read because there's no audiobook available except I think on Audible, one of y'all told me. I got through only a couple of chapters. One, it didn't really grab me, but two, it was a physical book, so I couldn't really sit down and really get into it. So I didn't finish that this month, and it was my book club read, and I feel horrible about that. But at the same time, I think I'm also realizing I may be ending my book club. Still will have my Patreon, still will be here on YouTube, of course, and everything. Instagram is still going mile a minute. But as far as, my book club on Fable and even my Discord, I found that it's a lot. And it's not that I wanted to start off the year wanting to create these community spaces to have conversations with y'all about the books that we're reading, but I am not in a space to keep those conversations alive and going. And I need to be honest with myself about that and maybe come back to this when I have a bigger audience to maybe move those conversations for me rather than me being an pilot. Like I have tons of discords that I'm a part of, and I don't even check those discords because I'm constantly working on 5 million other things. I hate saying this, but I think that I'm going to be ending my book club as well as my Discord. I think that I'll only open up the Discord during I Love Black Horror Month to have conversations during that month, and that's a space where I can do that. But during the rest of the year, I'm probably not going to focus on it. I know plenty of people who kind of do that, and I think that's where my bandwidth is. That's just being completely honest. I know I'm not really happy about it, but I have to. I don't want to give y'all anything lackluster. So, um, yeah, that is my wrap up. Those are my announcements. I am looking forward to. I've already finished one book for my Latino Heritage Month reading for September, and I have a really great TBR to share with y'all regarding all of that. I've already read Jawbone by Monica Ojeda, and it was amazing. So I feel like it's a great start to the month as far as my reading is concerned, and I can't wait to share it with y'all. So make sure that you subscribe down below if you're interested in hearing about my upcoming TBR, and if you enjoyed today's video, I have plenty more reviews and recommendations coming at y'all because we are in fall, although LA has not gotten the update with this heat. But we are in fall, we're going into spooky season, and I have nothing but tons of recommendations for you. As well as, of course, y'all are going to get some Halloween content over here because we are finally in the time. We are finally in this space. It's nice, but now I feel like we're on the clock. So please subscribe down below if any of that sounds good to you. I hope that y'all enjoyed today's video. Please give it a like if you did, and I will see y'all in the next one. I think the next one will probably be a September TBR, or it'll be like some sort of Halloween video. So just keep a lookout for that. I'll see you in the next one, y'all. Bye.